Hey everyone, and welcome to another 2 hours of horror stories with no mid-roll ads. I hope you all enjoy them. Tonight we have 10 stories in total. This one is an especially good lineup, so I hope you all enjoy them as much as I did. If you do enjoy, please be sure to drop a like rating. Let's see if we can reach 1 likes on this video. It would mean a lot to me. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated. I post videos just like this all of the time. Anyways, sit back, do whatever it is that you do to relax, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. It's been about 7 months since I signed my year-long lease for this crappy apartment. I don't think I'll be making it another 5 months. I'm not sure if I'll even make it another night. My cheapness might have cost my life. I was going to make this a short cry for help before I remembered that no one would ever believe me, and it would be too late anyway. Hell, I wouldn't believe this if I stumbled across it. I'll just take my time here and pour my heart out. 7 months ago, I made what I now realize was the worst decision of my life. I moved into this dumpy apartment building after finally making the move out of my hometown. I had romanticized the idea of escapism so much. I pictured myself in New York City or something like that, walking down the sidewalk with some overpriced coffee in my hands and my tasteful messenger bag slung over my shoulder. I'd be walking to somewhere idyllic, maybe a get-together with new friends that took an interest in me or something like that. I never made it too far into that daydream. I just wanted to get out of that little rural town. It was one of those towns that was just a road with a bunch of sad old signs along it, blown out buildings with occasional passing silhouettes that were once somebody's. Let's just say I couldn't afford New York City, but I could afford a small city a few hours from that rotting place of a town. It's a city with some high-rises and skyscrapers, but nothing that's going to put it on somebody's road trip. It's a pretty lonely place, honestly. It's old and tired like my hometown, but in a more industrial way. Walkability isn't much of a reality here, unless you want to take your chances with the harsh weather, or the rampant mugging. So there went my sidewalk daydream. Still, I wanted to make the most of the experience. I got an apartment right downtown for a reasonable price and figured life would improve from there on. However, I failed to truly grasp how much of a piece of crap the apartment was until I moved in. I was a little too naive at the time to understand the spectrum of stress caused by a landlord special. The doorknobs would come right off, the fridge never fully shut, the toilet wouldn't flush without some sacred jiggling sequence, and a whole mess of other inconveniences or hazards. This apartment also had a lot of strange features. The floor plan doesn't make much sense, and anyone with a shred of interior design knowledge, or even just self-respect, would have immediately crossed this place off their list. I was so desperate, though, that I didn't mind when I entered the apartment and just saw a hallway full of closed doors. I shrugged off how strange it was that each room was contained behind one of those doors, with none of the rooms connecting to one another. The kitchen is its own closed-off room. The living room, too. The only way to get anywhere in the apartment was to take the central hallway. It honestly looks like one of those hallway chase shots in Scooby-Doo or something. For how awful the place is, it's not small. There are a good amount of rooms, and I actually hadn't been able to fill one particular room until recently. When you walk into the place, there's the long hallway and then 9 doors in total. There's 4 on the left side, 4 on the right, and 1 at the very end of the hallway. On the right side, the doors in order are the living room, a closet, then my bedroom, and then the bathroom. On the left side, it starts with a kitchen, then another closet, the dining room, and a second bedroom. The 9th door in the middle is that extra room. I barely had enough stuff just to fill the other rooms, and I lacked any sort of motivation to do anything with the extra room for a while. I have a corner unit, so all the rooms on the right side of the apartment have windows, as well as the extra room. The extra room has these neat casement windows that I like to look out of, but offer little privacy. I had thought to make the extra room a sort of reading area, or a home theater type deal, but I was flat broke. The extra room is strange. It's really big and open. It feels like an apartment of its own. One night, I was in there just looking out the other surrounding high-rises when I noticed a light switch that had been painted over right next to the window. I didn't think much of it. It was clearly just another amenity of my crap hole apartment. I left it alone. As time went on, I found myself in that extra room most nights just looking out the window. I didn't have the money for any fancy streaming services, nor friends to leech off of, so I just looked out that window most nights. It was peaceful, and at night the city looked bigger and more lively. I loved seeing all the different lights, the blurry shapes of people in their own world watching their TV or making dinner. It didn't take long for me to start picking at that point on that hidden light switch as I watched the world wind down every night. I'd chip away at the paint little by little with my finger while I was lost in my thoughts. It took a few days to make any sort of progress, but eventually I had peeled off enough paint to see the light switch. It was a different color than the new plain white paint that covered everything else. It was bronze, and the switch itself was almost antique looking. It got me wondering how old this building was. A few nights later, the old switch was finally uncovered. It caught the light in an intoxicating way, and I flipped the switch on and off a few times to see if it still worked and what it controlled. Nothing changed. The next night brought a heavy snowstorm. It was beautiful, and you already know I was set up at that window staring out at the world as the brilliant snow fell. At some point, I was reminded of the bronze light switch and I flicked it, not remembering if I'd already tried it the night before. Nothing changed. I absent-mindedly flicked it again and noticed something strange out of the corner of my eye. A light turned on in the building across the street. It was the rightmost room on the top floor of the neighboring high-rise, which was quite a bit taller than my building. At first, I just thought it was something new to look at. My hand still on the switch, I craned my neck up and leaned in to watch the new light. I lost concentration and flicked the switch down, and the room's light turned off. That caught my attention. I looked down at the switch and back up at the now dark pane of glass. I flipped the switch up, and at that exact moment the room's light turned back on. I continued doing this for probably 5 minutes, just flipping the switch on and off and watching as the faraway room's light perfectly matched. The snow began falling even more, and I could still make out the light turning off and on with every flick of the old switch. I was baffled before too long, so baffled that I went right to sleep, convinced I was deprived of logic and reasoning. The next night came, and, at first, I was definitely reluctant to mess with that switch or to even go in that room. I tried staring out other windows, but they were cloudy with trapped moisture. I remember thinking I should get a cat or something before I finally caved and walked into the extra room. There was traffic on the street below from some accident that night, and it provided me with enough entertainment to remain distracted from what happened the night before. The standstill row of gray cars could only stimulate me for so long before I was looking at that switch again. I flipped it. Such a harmless action, and so quick, too. Flipping a light switch. Usually done by second nature. What's the harm in it? Why did flipping that switch feel so important? The same room from the night before lit up. It was a yellow, more vintage-looking tone of light. I tried using some beaten-up binoculars from my childhood, but all I got was a somehow fuzzier view of the room. From my vantage, I could only really see the ceiling of that mysterious place. That's gotta be an apartment, right? It looks too big to be a storage closet, too small to be anything commercial. I flipped the switch again, and the light turned off in perfect succession. Is somebody messing with me? Flip. The light came back on. How would they even orchestrate that? I sat there for a long time, repeatedly flipping the switch on and off as if the repetition of this would bring more clarity. I stood there flipping that switch on and off like I was a geriatric old man smacking a television set, hoping for a signal. The traffic jam cleared out and the streets became empty. I sat there, still as I could be, periodically flipping the switch on and off. The light synced every single time. Clearly this light switch, for some reason, was wired to that room in the building across the street. As to why, I had no earthly idea. What an expensive project. And for what? What purpose does it serve? I flipped the switch up and the light came back on. That last flip of the switch activated a sorry light bulb moment within me. What if I found a way into that room? So I waited in the bitter cold, rehearsing my moves. I had counted up from the ground and determined the room which connected to my light switch was on the 31st floor, and again it was the corner unit on the right side of the building when viewing from my apartment. I waited for someone to go in or out of the building. Finally, I saw a woman with a giant coat drag her scrappy little dog towards the door. I was hesitant to actually go inside. But then I gathered some courage, walked right up to that door and casually slid through as she opened it. I had planned some elaborate cover story that my friend wouldn't answer his phone and all that, but when it came time, I just acted natural and thanked her as I entered. The walls were green and sickly looking, much like my apartment building. The elevator was questionable at best, and creaked a little too much as I stepped into it. There were 33 floors, so I was glad I had made note of the correct one. I slowly reached up and hit the circular button for the 31st floor, and it flickered on, glowing with a jaundiced yellow. My hands grew clammy as the elevator ascended at a torturously slow pace. I watched the numbers rise. 11, 12, 13. This is a stupid idea, man. This is all in my head. Why am I doing this? 26, 27, 28. Is this even legal? What am I going to do exactly? The elevator finally dinged and bounced to a stop on the 31st floor before I had an actual plan. The doors were reluctant to open, and for a moment my heart sank thinking I had been trapped in there. Those silver doors creaked and warped as they moved out of the way and exposed me to another green hallway. I stepped out and turned left. I could see all the way down the long dilapidated hall, the green lights humming and buzzing. My alleged culprit was the final door on the right. It was room 3118. I sat outside the door like a maniac, just looking at it. I wondered what to do. I could barely see through the slits on the sides of the door. All I could make out was the lights were on in there. Do I knock? I looked around me and made sure the coast was clear. What the hell do I say? Maybe I'm lost. Maybe it's an honest mistake. If anyone lives in there, I'm sure they're very confused about their lights turning on and off. But why wouldn't they take control of their own lights? Maybe they can't use them, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would I be able to control their lights, but they can't? I knocked on the door and startled myself. It felt almost automatic. Unsure of what to do, I started to shuffle away and make my retreat. Then I decided to stay and wait. I waited for a few seconds. The pause was long and uncomfortable enough for my hand to instinctually rise for another round of knocking. A faint and vague sound, dampened enough to even be of my own mind, but it was the sound of dragging, or a thud of some kind with something rolling afterward. What was that? The sound might have continued, or my mind might have kept wandering. Maybe the neighbors. The walls were thin in this place. I could begin to hear indiscernible conversations somewhere down the hall, I could hear the hissing chatter of a TV show somewhere else. Underneath all that, though, in room 3118, a rolling sound still. Maybe. What is that noise? I left not long after. I was getting freaked out, and I'm sure I would have freaked out anyone living there. When I got back to my place across the street, I felt very paranoid. I felt like I was being watched. I opened the squeaky door to my apartment, and the long, dark hallway of 9 closed doors now made me nauseous with dread. I wanted to leave that apartment behind and run back into my mom's arms or something. I felt like a child. I walked in, though, and I wish I hadn't. I took a scorching hot shower. It made me feel a little better, but I was still so paranoid. I kept hearing, or thought I was hearing, similar thudding and rolling sounds in one of the other rooms. Old pipes, that's all. It took some more courage to leave the bathroom and enter the cold, dark hall. I don't know what door to go through next. The kitchen door, bedroom door, or the extra door. My stomach was in a knot, but I thought I should probably try and eat something. It was around midnight by that point, and I felt hopeless knowing there were so many more hours of dark left. I looked down at my half-eaten peanut butter sandwich, and knew this knot in my stomach wouldn't go away if I didn't have some kind of closure. I wanted to go into the extra room and turn off that switch for the night. I braved the silent hallway again, and opened up the 9th door into that grand room that turned the faintest sound into a booming echo. I walked up to the big window I always looked out of and, with great caution, looked up at room 3118. The light was still on, and there was something up there now. I couldn't tell what it was, but it looked like a big shadow. It wasn't a person, but something boxy looking. Something square or just rigid, really. Furniture? Did someone move something around in there? I didn't know what I was looking at, and I honestly didn't have the mental space to think about it much longer. I flipped off the switch. I flipped it back on. I couldn't deny my interest. I was very invested in this whole ordeal now. The rigid thing started moving. At least, I thought it looked like it was slowly changing position. It moved very smoothly and very, very slowly. It looked like it was rolling or sliding. It rolled from the right side of the window to the left. I flipped the switch here and there to see if it made any sort of difference. Didn't seem to. I watched it roll along for a few minutes from right to left until I jumped at the sight of the neighboring window's light turning on. It was whoever lived in room 3116. I saw a person moving around in there, and it looked like a more elderly man. He looked like he was listening closely to something, as if there were an intruder in his house. I didn't know what to do, but now I felt intrusive watching this man fumble around. I decided to switch the light off in 3118 and try to forget about the whole thing. I wanted to remove myself from this weird nightmare entirely. I decided that the next day I'd try to disconnect the switch and install some curtains. Find a new hobby. That all sounded like something rooted in everyday monotony, and I let the comfort of curtain shopping lull me to sleep. In my sleep that night, I heard the sound of aggressive wind chimes far away. They weren't very melodic wind chimes, sort of just one tone and reverberated. Then I heard an awful banging sound. It was loud and most definitely not a dream. It sounded distant, but it contained a lot of power. It was 3:48 a.m. I tossed and I turned until my bedroom started flashing red. I got out of bed and tried to see what was happening outside from my bedroom window, but I couldn't see through all the gloom trapped in between the glass. I had no choice but to go into the extra room if I wanted to see outside. There was a large fire truck that was blocking off one side of the road, and police were putting up caution tape on the other. Squad cars were rolling in one after the other. A few ambulances were present too, but it seemed like no one was in a big rush. They were all circled around, their hands waving about in a casual, conversational way. At some point, one of them looked up and pointed, and the others followed along. I followed the trajectory of the gestures all the way to the 31st floor. Room 3116 was now missing its pane of glass. The curtains whipped out into the open world. The lights were still on, and I could make out vague details of the interior. Back on the ground, a few paramedics moved out of the way long enough for me to see what I was already preparing to see. The old man from room 3116 was laying there in a confusing mess of fabric, flesh, and bones surrounded by a growing puddle of blood. I was shocked. What the hell is going on? What did I do? Am I losing my mind? Did I inadvertently kill that man? The next few days were a blur. My head was heavy with the endless hum of 1,000 different thoughts, all saying similar things. I felt an immense weight of guilt, even though there was nothing tangible that connected me to the old man's plunge. In my head, there was an ever-growing web of continuity. I uncovered the old switch. I flipped it incessantly, and, in doing that, I created or resumed something. That something looked like a giant rectangle that rolled around and made a man jump to his death. Or maybe it pushed him out by force. But why? None of this makes any sense. Maybe it's all just make-believe. I could have misunderstood what I saw. The rolling rectangle thing. Maybe it was just an illusion. That old man, maybe it's just a coincidence he chose tonight to leap. I know what I saw. I no longer was going into the extra room for any reason. The thought of that big empty space with that switch made me nauseous. I couldn't stand sleeping just a few doors away from it. I wanted to move out and get away. I should have done that. Reality doesn't make room for fiction, though. I couldn't and still can't afford to break the lease. Not by a long shot. That's 3 rent payments and a bundle of paperwork in this godforsaken building. The apartment's obviously outdated, so I thought about making a case for lead paint or something toxic that could maybe get me out of here for free. And quick, but I'm not sure how that'd blow over. I don't even know how to go about doing something like that. I chose the route of avoidance. If I could ignore the extra room, the mystery switch, the dead man's browning blood stain on the road, and the rolling rectangle monster whose whereabouts weren't known, maybe it'd all just fade away with time. A few weeks went by and that strategy was seeming to work. Even in that short time, I was afforded some hindsight of the whole event. How I was jumping to conclusions, being paranoid, and maybe not appreciating my deteriorating vision that was probably making some serious guesswork. Still, there was no explaining away the light switch. That switch is undoubtedly connected to room 3118 across the street for some unknown reason. I must have tested it hundreds of times. I tried to not let that fact dig too deep when I couldn't sleep, or when I'd think I heard the rolling sounds across the apartment late at night. Eventually, I had saved up enough money to treat myself with some more furniture. I wanted to reclaim the extra room and make it mine. I started with a thrifted recliner and some shelves. I was planning on making it a home theater after all. I had plans to bury the big casement windows behind blackout curtains. Earlier tonight, I was moving some new finds into the home theater. The room's echo was just as booming and awful as when it was empty, and I flinched with every screech and scrape the furniture would make when I moved it. As I heaved the new TV stand around, my eyes subconsciously checked on room 3118, a reflex that must have been built into me after all those cold nights. The lights were off as I had left them the last time I flipped the switch. The lights were on in room 3116. Don't freak out. Maybe someone new moved in. I watched longer than I should have. I don't know why I'm so nosy, always trying to get to the bottom of everything. I watched and waited for any sign of movement in room 3116. I never saw a soul in there. At some point, the big coat lady came out of the building with her dog and, for some stupid reason, I felt compelled to go talk to her. I just need to be sure of something. I walked casually down the sidewalk, waiting to run into her again. I was going to ask her if she had a lighter, and then I was going to ask her if she had any information on room 3116. Eventually, she reappeared around the corner with her feisty little dog walking on its hind legs, strangling itself with the leash. I was leaned up on the wall next to the door I had snuck in weeks before, waiting to say my line. "Excuse me," I said. "Do you have a light?" She looked up with confusion. "Like a flashlight?" she asked. I flashed my carton of cigarettes. "Oh, no, honey. I've got asthma. Sorry." "No problem," I muttered back. I tried to come up with anything else I could say, so I could eventually segue into room 3116. Blanking, I simply stared ahead in disappointment. That's when I noticed the faded bloodstain on the sidewalk from the old man. I clicked my tongue. "Terrible what happened," I muttered. The big coat lady turned around and saw what I was staring at, understanding immediately. I know. I'm up on the 13th floor and I heard the sound." She was slowly nodding and now staring at the old puddle of blood herself. "I heard someone talking about how they already moved the new family into that unit he was in. Is that right?" I asked, surprising myself. "Oh, no. I think they're letting it sit like they did with the last one," she said. My brow raised. I tried to not act like an insane person and scare her off. "The last one?" I asked hesitantly. "Yeah, it was just a few months ago. Or maybe it was a year now. But the young couple that lived right next door to him jumped out the window too," she said in a flat way. I could have fainted. I felt dizzy and clammy, but I tried to keep my calm demeanor. "That is... wow. I'm pretty new to the building, so I hadn't heard," I stammered. I resigned from my niceties, and my eyes went out to focus as my mind began jumping to its newest conclusion. Somewhere in my peripheral, I noticed the lady nodding and looking down at her scraggly dog. "Well, it sure is hard out there these days," she said, breaking the silence. She shuffled through the heavy apartment door which slammed behind her, startling me. Torn from my trance, I quickly retreated back to my apartment. Crap. What does this mean? That rolling square thing lives in that room and what? Kills people in it and around it? Do the people kill themselves? Does the thing maybe inject them with something that makes them, I don't know, suicidal? Or maybe they go crazy and just jump? I was thinking like a lunatic, like one of the cracked-out vagrants wandering through the abandoned motels back in my hometown. I tried to slow myself down, but now I'd been given perfect evidence to suit my paranoid suspicions. At first, I was just trying to solve this complex series of events. Then I remembered I was involved. I remembered the switch plays a role in this whole thing. The light switch in my home theater. How far can it move? How far? Could it cross the street and climb the stairs and break in? Maybe it's quiet, or maybe it has some kind of way to silently open my door so I don't notice. So the neighbors don't notice. I found myself back in the home theater with some cheap whiskey in a plastic bottle. I sipped on it and enjoyed the aromantic sting that made me slowly feel braver with every gulp. I looked up at the 31st floor across the street. The lights were still on in room 3116. They're probably just cleaning it out. You need to calm yourself. None of this is your problem. I felt better and braver still with every new swig of the cruel whiskey. At some point, I hovered my hand over the light switch. The dwindling sobriety in me said no. The courageous, drunk in me said, I'm just curious. My sight was beginning to sharpen and blur, and I could tell I was swaying as I just stood in front of those windows. I was drunk enough to where I felt like an observer of a faded memory from the past. I was drunk enough to where any action felt insignificant, and all would be fine because nothing mattered. I flipped the switch, expecting the lights of room 3118 to blink on. The lights in room 3116 turned off instead. I don't know why, but seeing those lights turn off made me duck and hide below the window. I felt like I woke the rolling thing up, and now it could see me. It moved. It moved. Logic and reasoning was now out the window. The lights magically switched rooms, and I can only imagine it's because the square rolling thing now occupied, or will now materialize inside of room 3116. I continued hiding and thinking horrible thoughts to myself. I then did something I would have never done had I not been wasted. I grabbed a hammer and smashed the light switch. I smashed it into a million pieces and then smashed those pieces into dust. I'm sure my neighbors were fuming, but I had been quiet as a church mouse up until tonight. Both room 3118 and 3116 now had no lights on, and had made the drunken assumption that now they were both safe. This all began when I turned the lights on in 3118. Now the lights would stay off forever, and I made sure of it. Clearly, I didn't have the self-control to stop myself from tinkering with this unknown thing. I doubt anyone else who would live here would have much more discipline, so I smashed the switch into a million pieces. It wasn't long before I blacked out. Something woke me up hours later. It was deep into the night. I was still in the home theater and still drunk, but now also hungover. I tried to pull it together enough to figure out what woke me. I had thought it was a loud sound, but maybe it wasn't. The air felt like something loud had just occurred, but that was just a feeling, maybe one of paranoia. I looked out the window and half expected to see another person, or persons lying smashed on the ground after diving off the 31st floor. But I saw no such horror. Both 3118 and 3116's lights were still off. I rubbed my eyes and looked around the pitch-black room. I felt my blood freeze. There was a light on in my apartment. I could see the thin sliver of yellow illuminating underneath the door of the home theater. It's in. I wanted to run at first, but then I wanted to sit still and just listen. So I sat there, waiting for something. Maybe it was waiting for me to make a move. Then I heard it, muffled, maybe in the kitchen, rolling. Finally, I could hear the sound in finer detail. The wheels sounded heavy, like the sound of a stone tomb opening. The cheap hardwood floor buckled and cracked underneath those giant rolling wheels, which must have moved extremely slow and calculated, as if it was listening for my heartbeat. I was frozen with fear and confused. So confused. What kind of nightmare has my life become? I wanted to try and make a break for it. I thought about running as fast as I could down my awful hallway and ripping that front door open. It was only a few quick strides away. I sat up a little too quickly. Adrenaline was kicking in. A spring in the crappy second-hand recliner I had passed out on popped, causing an insignificant yet audible click throughout the house. Rolling followed. It was very slow. So slow that one's ear could lose the deep droning tone after long enough to background noise. I slowly sat back and the recliner crinkled ever so softly. The thing made a noise so intentionally imperceptible I could hardly make it out. A metallic sliding sound, the sound of a door's latch being methodically opened. It was leaving the kitchen and maybe it was moving on to one of the other doors now. The yellow sliver of light went out, and the apartment was now totally dark. Rolling persisted, and I was barely able to perceive the noise. I spent the next few minutes sliding off my recliner with the precision of prey which I undoubtedly had become. 30 minutes could have passed before I had crawled close enough to see under the door's crack. I carefully positioned my left eye to where I could see out into the black hallway just enough. Something impossibly dark. Darker than the natural blackness of night. It was just sitting in the hall, waiting. It was large and boxy, just like that silhouette in 3118. It looked to almost perfectly fit the dimensions of the hall, leaving me sealed in. I'm dead. Maybe not. Maybe I can call the police or something and distract it. It'd kill them though, right? Then I'd be a murderer. Maybe. Or maybe it would roll away. Maybe it isn't bulletproof. I can't have anyone else's blood on my hands. Maybe I can start a fire somehow, and then the fire department will be able to rescue me from the window. Maybe that's the stupidest thought I've ever had. Too much noise. I can't make any noise. I can't make a sound or it'll come get me. My thoughts were so frantic and visceral, I feared even they would make a sound which could be intercepted by the masterful listener, sitting mere feet away. Another 30 minutes of eternity, and I had silently made my way towards the large windows. I was so cautious and so deliberate in my movements as to not touch the tiniest plastic shard on the ground from when I had drunkenly destroyed the light switch. Maybe I made it angry by doing that. Maybe, in breaking the switch, the thing reverted back to me. Or maybe I exposed myself to it when I smashed that switch. I tried to use my phone and call for help, text for help, email for help. None of it was going through. That rolling demon must have jammed my signal somehow. I ran out of hope. I froze in place. Eventually, I just started to write all of this. I'm still in the home theater, typing this all out on my phone as quietly as I can, even sipping the last of my whiskey with the most delicate swigs one could imagine. This whole thing is rather bleak, and I apologize if you stumble across this. I've scheduled this post to go up in 8 hours. Maybe by then the thing will have left and my final words will get out into the world to be forgotten or laughed at. I'm sure you think I'm insane, or maybe I'm just a liar. And that's okay. I know what happened here tonight. I don't know how or why any of this happened, but I know the rolling thing outside my door is real. I don't know why it's here, what its motivation is, if it's man-made or some impersonation of something we'd engineered. Or maybe it's the very muse of humanity's chase for right angles and industrial design. I now understand how those people in room 3118 and 3116 met their fate on the cracked pavement below. I think it wants me to kill myself. Either that or it's totally content with me killing myself. It's had me trapped in this room for hours now. It could have barged in and flattened me at any point, but it hasn't yet. Funny how this all started in this extra room of mine. Funny how these windows are the ideal design and size for me to throw myself from this hellish place. I don't know anymore. At this point, I'm just trying to buy time and sip more whiskey before the inevitable. I had been distracted in writing this for a few hours, and even began to have hope that when the sun came up, the thing would roll away. All I'd need is a few minutes to get out. I don't think I'm so lucky, though. The sky is beginning to brighten into a deep blue, and once again I hear that steady rolling, so slow and meticulous. It must only be moving a centimeter every 15 minutes. The whiskey is doing its job, and it's becoming harder to type, harder to maintain literacy. I think I'll wrap this up here. I'm sorry, everyone. I can only hope this is seen, and if you did see this, I thank you for keeping me company, in a way. The sun's almost up. I hear rolling and it's close. The view from the window is very nice. It's looking like a nice day. I hope it is a nice day. As you've probably gleaned from the title of this post, I'm an urban explorer. My specialty is finding and investigating structures that, for lack of any better description, just don't make sense. Sometimes it's something small, like a house that's slightly wider on the inside than the outside. That's quite common, and often goes unnoticed. Maybe a door gets minutely wider as you open it, then returns to its original dimensions when it gets closed. Then there's the big stuff. The stuff I'm actually interested in. Rooms that shouldn't exist, impossibly high ceilings, that sort of thing. I don't normally post anything here. I tend to just read all your spooky stories and personal experiences, which makes me feel like my experiences aren't that unusual to be having. As bizarre as that sounds. I wanted my first post here to be a document of all the weird encounters I've had with strange places over the years. This post will still be that, but if I'm going to talk about all that, I also need to go into the events of the last month, which ultimately led to all my friends taking a step back from urban exploration altogether. So, a bit of background. I live in the UK, in Manchester. Like all cities, it has nice parts and not so nice parts. As much as I love the city, sometimes it feels like there isn't much to do. At least, nothing that interests us. So every few weeks, me and my group of friends hop on a train and go somewhere else. We pack bags full of camping equipment, torches, high-vis vests, plenty of rope, and anything else we think we might need. We scope out a spot, which normally involves checking social media for people talking about how they had an unusual experience near an abandoned building after dark, or how a family pet disappeared near a decommissioned train tunnel, stuff like that. Once we have a spot that's likely to be the kind of thing we're after, we figure out what we might need, what we are likely to encounter, etc. Most explorations are fairly routine. We stay the night nearby, watching the area to see if there are any guards or squatters. 9 times out of 10, there aren't. Then we make our entry. Typically, we open the door or poke our heads in through a window first, just to see what we're dealing with. You never know when you are going to walk through the front door without a care in the world and fall down a bottomless pit. No, that hasn't happened yet. It very nearly happened to one of the guys last year, but we've been very cautious since then. Some of my favorite places include, I love the possibly endless train tunnel. It was a lot of fun. I won't say where it is. I don't want a bunch of people to go there and ruin the spot with graffiti and rubbish and syringes and the like. Actually, I just looked it up and apparently the police walled up both ends and sealed the tunnel a few months ago. A shame. Definitely my favorite place to visit. I hope no one ended up cluelessly wandering in. I was in there with another guy, and I remember very vividly the moment where we crossed over into the Twilight Zone, as my mate put it. He wasn't far off. When we were walking, we could feel the air gently moving through the tunnel, even though we couldn't see the other end in the darkness. We knew there was an opening that air was blowing through. There was the occasional scatter of a squirrel or rat or something, which freaked us out every time it happened, sending the pair of us into a brief laughing fit over how much we had jumped. And then, after walking for about 5 minutes, the subtle breeze stopped. When it happened, we both instantly realized and stood motionless. It was like both ends of the tunnel had closed. There were no more rats or squirrels, just the pair of us, alone in the quiet darkness. Naturally, we were grinning like giddy kids. My torch didn't work, nor did my mate's. We tried tugging the ropes secured around our waists to let our friends at the tunnel's entrance know that we were past the threshold, but they couldn't feel any tension in the rope from their end. We kept on walking. This tunnel wasn't very long, but you couldn't see the daylight at the end because the tunnel actually had a slight curve in it. In the past, before the anomaly formed, you'd walk through the tunnel and in 2 minutes, you would be out the other side. We walked for 20, the slight curve in the tunnel leading us around in a wide arch until we reckoned we were actually facing back the way we came. We stood there, theorizing how far the tunnel carried on curving around, debating whether to go further. We eventually decided not to. I didn't fancy walking for hours just to end up finding a dead end or something. When we reached the opening we had come from, the sounds of the world returned. Such an eerie feeling. Being outside time and space, That's absolutely not a proven theory, by the way. That's just what I'm going with. It's like once you step past the threshold, the world outside stops existing, or maybe it's you that stops existing for a moment. These strange places always smell the same. It's always the same persistent metallic odor. Sometimes it gets so intense that your eyes start to burn. Sometimes it can help you to find a threshold. There was one house we went to a couple years ago. One of my friends knew someone who said their house suddenly had an extra floor. That was extremely exciting. It's not every day you get to pinpoint the exact day a building changed. Most of the time, we got to a place to find that the building had been that way for a while. But this one was fresh. Houses are particularly odd to visit. Sometimes it's just an extra room, so we have to wander through the entire house until we find a room that smells like metal, often with weird pictures on the walls and no windows. This house was different. A whole new floor had seemingly grown overnight, and the best part? It wasn't just one new floor. After exploring the house for probably a good 2 hours, our watches stopped working. We counted 16 additional floors in this 2-story house. The only reason we stopped climbing the endless staircase was because our buddies outside ran out of rope. That's another thing. We never go into a property without a length of rope tied around us, fed back to 2 guys standing outside, mainly so the guys inside can find their way out. We typically carry a few 60 and 70 meter lengths of mountaineering rope each, giving us about 500 meters when tied end to end. At one point we carried closer to 700 or 800 meters, but at that point it got tough to transport. We all wake up in cold sweats from nightmares, where we found ourselves lost in an abandoned building with no windows or doors, breathlessly diving down endless hallways, crying out for anyone to find them. Not pleasant. I remember the place we went to that first made the rope a necessary precaution. There was a small patch of woodland somewhere on the west coast of Wales near a residential area. Again, no specifics. Not because I don't want to ruin the spot. This time, I straight up don't want people flocking there and getting themselves killed. We saw on social media, mainly Reddit, that a couple people's pets had gone missing around there. They thought a predatory animal might be in the woods, so they sent animal control to do a sweep, which didn't take long since it's an area of about 50 trees. It came up clean. That's what got our interest piqued. We showed up and started doing some surveillance. We had a theory that the anomaly was only manifesting during the night, which we had seen once or twice before at other locations. Probably something to do with the decreased visibility. We were right. We went in after dark and suddenly the wooded area of 50 trees turned into a dense forest seeming to go on for miles. Me and my buddy walked for 30 minutes before we stopped and headed back. Even with the rope tied around our waists, leading back to our friends at the edge of the woods, we still got lost. It was dark enough that we could barely see our ropes. We ended up circling around trees and each other's lines. We couldn't call out to the others either. Since sound works differently once you are past the threshold, that means we couldn't hear them, and they couldn't hear us. After a while of awkwardly stumbling around in the dark, single file with my hand on his shoulder, pulling our ropes constantly to keep the tension, we made it out. That was the most frightened I have ever been when exploring a place. We don't do forests anymore. Some guy one of my friends used to hang out with always wanted to find out what caused the anomalies to form. We tended not to tell anyone about the anomalies, since the news and the police always cover up any instances, and we didn't want our friends or family getting taken in the night by G-men. That being said, some people came to know about them, this guy being one. He had a theory that a power plant he lived near was actually a secret underground hadron collider. That sounded awesome. So of course we checked it out. It turned out that the power plant was one of these strange places. We managed to dodge to surprisingly lax security and got in through a window, to find that the geometry inside made absolutely no sense. There was no ceiling, first of all, just walls and doors that extended upwards into the darkness. A lot of rooms were either too big or far too small to make sense, and plenty of them were in weird places relative to the building's dimensions. By far the weirdest part was that this power plant was still in use. Workers still went in through the front door and came out hours later like regular plant workers, seemingly oblivious to the fact that the interior of their building looked like something fresh out of Stephen King's nightmares. I started believing that guy after seeing all that. I don't know about the Hadron Collider theory, but that building definitely has something to do with something. In terms of which of us came the closest to finding out why these weird structures exist, and how they keep forming, I reckon he got the closest. And then, last month, my mate and I went to check on him at his house. Apparently he hadn't been responding to texts or calls, which was strange since he never just dropped off the grid like that. Even if he was going on holiday or something, he would let someone know. When we got to his front door, it was slightly ajar. We got worried at that point, so we pushed it open. Inside was a vast expanse of darkness. No walls, no ceiling, just a flat floor extending inwards until the light from the outdoors dissipated far into the distance. A couple days later, we went in with our equipment and ropes. The area was far wider than the house's floor plan. I think we ended up walking the length of a football field, if not more. I was in his house a couple months before this. Now he was gone, along with all his possessions, his ugly carpet, his old armchair, his goldfish, everything. Every trace of him gone. We optimistically thought that he might have come home from work to find his home like that and tried walking in. We thought that if we walked far enough and called out his name loud enough, that he might find his way back. We didn't want to grapple with the possibility that the anomaly formed while he was still inside, and that he just blinked out of existence along with his possessions. The police taped up the doors and boarded the windows, and a week later his house was knocked down. The anomaly was gone. Believe me, we tried to get back through the threshold, but it was gone. We stopped trying to find out the cause of the strange places after that. We just dropped our theories and left it alone. We don't go near the power plant. We don't even talk about it. This is the first time I'm mentioning it. My friends moved on from urban exploration for a while. They stepped up on their families and stable jobs, and they wouldn't risk any of it to explore another strange house or abandoned warehouse. That lasted all of a month. We still go out to abandoned buildings and train tunnels, as if in defiance of our fears. Yes, we have fears. Fears that we will wake up one day in a black void that was once our home. But for now, none of us are going to stop doing what we love. We just can't leave it alone. I actually tried to walk away from it all, but it's just too exhilarating. I get too much of a buzz from stepping past a threshold, that feeling of time standing still, sounds of the outside world being replaced with stone silence, like hands clasped over my ears. I live for that feeling, knowing that, to the rest of the world, for that brief moment, I simply don't exist. I didn't think one sip would change everything. It started at a gas station just outside Denver. I'd been driving cross-country to reset my life. New job, new city, no baggage. Just me, the road, and the radio. I stopped to stretch my legs and grab a drink. The cooler was half empty. Probably hadn't been restocked in a week. One bottle caught my eye. Black plastic. No label except a small red triangle printed on the cap. No brand name, no ingredients. Just that triangle. I should have known better. But it was cold and I was thirsty. I twisted the cap, and as soon as I raised it to my lips, I smelled it. Something off. Sweet, but too sweet, like rotting fruit drowned in cough syrup. Still, I took a sip. The taste was wrong, metallic, bitter almost, dusty. I gagged, spit it onto the floor, and dropped the bottle. The cashier looked at me like I'd thrown a grenade. "What the hell are you doing?" he snapped, rushing out from behind the counter. "Something's wrong with that drink," I said, wiping my mouth. He stared at the puddle, then at me, then at the bottle. And then he ran. I stood there stunned as the door jingled behind him. I waited a few seconds, called out. Nothing. Finally, I walked outside and saw his car peel out of the lot, tires screaming. That's when the fear crept in. That bottle wasn't just bad. It was meant to be bad. That night I didn't sleep. I kept thinking about that triangle. I searched the internet for hours, Reddit, weird forums, conspiracy threads, but nothing useful. Just dead ends and half-baked urban legends. The next morning I hit the road again. By afternoon a black SUV had been behind me for over 60 miles. Every turn I took, it took. Every exit, it followed. Finally I pulled off into a crowded strip mall. The SUV parked 2 rows down. 3 men got out, all in black suits wearing mirrored sunglasses. No smiles, no talking, just scanning. I ditched my car and ran. That was 6 days ago. Since then I've been hiding in motels, moving every night. The black SUVs keep finding me. Sometimes they don't bother hiding. Sometimes they knock on the door pretending to be cops or hotel staff or delivery guys. I stopped answering. I stopped sleeping. I can barely eat. One night I found a thread on a dark web forum. Someone else mentioned the triangle, said it's part of something called the selection. They didn't explain it, but they said this: drink it and die in peace. Spit it out, and you're prey. I replied, begged for answers. They sent me a private message. Every year they manufacture 1,000 unmarked bottles. They're placed at random locations across the U.S. Gas stations, vending machines, cafes. Most drink and die instantly. Quiet, clean, no mess, no questions. But if you reject the offering, they come. I don't know who they are. I've been stabbed once, chased 4 times, and drugged in a motel coffee this morning. I only drank half before I smelled the same syrupy scent. They're not trying to kill me quickly. They want fear, exhaustion, panic. I think I ruined something sacred. I rejected their sacrament. And now they're enjoying the hunt. I haven't seen my reflection in 3 days. I'm afraid of what I'll see, how much I've changed, how hollow I've become. If you find a drink with a red triangle on the cap, don't sip it, don't open it, walk away. Because if you spit it out, you'll never stop running, and they never stop hunting. When my grandfather passed, I inherited his cabin by the lake. It wasn't much, 1 story, drafty in winter, built back when insulation meant more wood. But it was quiet, peaceful at least, that's what I thought. I moved in last fall. The air smelled like wet pine and the lake behind the house looked like black glass at night. I'd stand on the back porch with a beer, listening to crickets and the occasional splash from fish breaking the surface. For the first month it was perfect. No neighbors for a mile, no traffic, no city noise. Then I started hearing it. The first night it was around 2 a.m. I'd fallen asleep on the couch and woke up to what sounded like someone slowly dragging a shovel through the mud outside. Long, wet scrapes. Pauses between them, like they were listening for something. I sat up, held my breath, and it stopped. The next morning I checked the shore. There was a line in the mud, about 4 inches deep, starting from the tree line and ending at the water's edge. No footprints, just that strange trench. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching the cabin at night. I kept the curtains closed, but every so often I'd hear that same dragging sound outside, always starting in the woods and heading toward the water, always stopping when I got too close to the windows. One night in December, I caught it. I woke to the sound again, this time closer, right outside the porch. I crept to the back door and pulled aside the curtain just enough to peek. There was something standing in the frost-covered yard, backlit by the moon. It was tall, at least 7 feet, with limbs too long for its body. Its skin hung in loose folds like it had been stretched over the wrong frame. It was holding something in one hand. A stick, maybe. No, not a stick. It was a long, pale spine. The sound I'd heard was it dragging the tip of it through the frozen dirt. Its head? God, its head. It didn't have a face, not in the way we do. Just a long vertical slit, opening and closing like gills, flexing in the cold air. I must have made some noise because its head snapped toward me, that slit opening wide enough to show rows of needle-thin teeth inside. Then it turned and walked into the lake, not into the shallows, straight in, until the water swallowed it whole. I tried to convince myself I was dreaming, but over the next week I found more of those trenches in the mud, always leading to the water, always starting closer to the cabin. Last night, it changed. I woke to the sound again, dragging, slow, but this time it didn't stop. It moved around the cabin, circling it. Once, twice, then it stopped at the front door. The porch creaked, and then I heard it tapping. Something sharp rapping on the wood in slow, steady beats. 3 taps, pause. 3 taps like it was waiting. I didn't open the door. I waited with a kitchen knife in my hand until dawn. When I finally got the nerve to check outside, the porch was covered in frost except for where it had stood. The boards there were slick with something that wasn't ice. It was thick, almost gelatinous, and smelled faintly like blood. It's almost midnight now. The cabin feels smaller somehow. The lake's black surface is perfectly still, and somewhere out there, I can hear it dragging that spine again, this time coming from the shoreline toward me. I think it's getting bolder. I double-checked every lock in the cabin, front door, back door, windows, even the crawl space hatch under the kitchen. Every latch slid into place with a soft click that felt far too quiet against the sound outside. The dragging had stopped. That was worse. I stood in the living room, knife in one hand, flashlight in the other, listening. The only sound was my own breathing, quick, uneven. Then, from somewhere behind the cabin, I heard it, a slow, deliberate creak of wood under weight. The back porch. I forced myself to keep still, every muscle in my body rigid. The sound came again, closer this time, and then there was a new one, the faint rasp of nails, or claws, tracing the length of the siding. It was walking the perimeter. The scratching moved from the back to the side, dragging low near the foundation, then high up by the windows, testing the walls, measuring me. I thought about turning on the outside floodlight. Then I thought about the possibility of seeing it. My hands shook so bad I nearly dropped the flashlight. When it reached the front of the cabin, it stopped. Silence again. I kept my eyes on the door, heart hammering so hard I could feel it in my throat. Then, the tapping. 3 slow knocks, each one heavier than the last, making the door shudder in its frame. Pause. 3 more. It did that for nearly a minute. Then the sound changed. A wet, rhythmic thud against the wood, like it was pressing something heavy into the door and dragging it down. I imagined that pale spine, slick with whatever was on the porch boards the night before, leaving streaks down the grain. I backed away toward the bedroom, still facing the door. My plan was to lock myself in, maybe wedge the dresser against it, but before I could move more than a few steps, the cabin groaned. Not from the door, from above. My stomach dropped. The roof. I could hear it moving, each step bending the old beams just enough to make them moan. It was slow, deliberate, pacing the length of the house like a predator above a cage. Dust drifted down from the ceiling fan as it stopped directly over me. That's when I heard it breathe. It wasn't the kind of breath you take through lungs. It was a deep, vibrating pull of air that made the walls hum, like the cabin itself was being inhaled, and mixed into it was a faint, wet clicking, like teeth snapping together in some private rhythm. I didn't move, didn't blink. My legs felt hollow, barely able to hold me up. Then something fell from the ceiling. It landed right in front of me. A piece of wood, no bigger than my thumb, splintered and dark with moisture. I looked up, and for the briefest second, I saw it between the slats. That slit where its face should be, teeth flexing inside, wet with strands of something that clung like spider silk. It slid out of view again. That was it. I bolted for the bedroom and locked the door. I shoved the dresser in front of it, then sat on the floor with my back against the wall. Knife pointed at the door like I'd be able to do anything if it came in. It paced the roof for what felt like hours. Every so often it would stop and I'd hear that long, deep inhale again. Only this time, I realized it wasn't drawing in the cabin. It was smelling me. At some point, the pacing stopped entirely. The silence that followed was somehow worse. I strained to hear anything. Footsteps, scratching, the drag of the spine, but there was nothing. I thought maybe it had left. Then the bedroom window behind me began to bulge. The glass didn't crack, it didn't shatter. It pushed inward like something was pressing against it from outside. The bulge grew, stretching until I could see the faintest outline of that slit, teeth just barely visible behind the thin distortion of the glass. It didn't strike. It didn't try to break in. It just stayed there, breathing against the window until the pane was fogged over from the inside. And then, so slowly I almost missed it, the fog began to pull back, like it was drawing my air out with it. When the sun finally rose, the window was clear. The roof was empty. The porch was bare. But in the frost at the end of the driveway, I found a single mark, a trench in the dirt, starting at the road and ending at my front steps. It's almost midnight again now, and I can hear it coming back. I'd been awake all day. No naps, no dozing on the couch. I wanted to be alert for tonight. Didn't matter. When darkness settled over the lake, the exhaustion hit me like a drug. My eyelids felt weighted, my head thick and heavy. It wasn't just lack of sleep. It felt imposed, like the air was laced with something pulling me under. I fought it by pacing the cabin, flashlight sweeping every corner. The walls creaked in the cold, but beneath that, I could hear the lake, a soft, constant lap, lap, lap of water on the shore, and over it faintly, that dragging sound again. I killed every light inside. If it wanted to see me, it would have to look through the dark. I stationed myself in the kitchen, where I could see both the front and back doors. The dragging came closer, circling the cabin, then it stopped. I didn't hear it for almost 5 minutes. Then the sound came again, inside the walls. The noise was subtle at first, like something brushing along the insulation. Then it got heavier, shifting, moving from the kitchen wall toward the living room. The boards shivered with each scrape, like it was wedging itself through spaces too small for anything human. I backed up, keeping the knife raised. The sound reached the corner where the chimney met the wall and stopped. A soft, hollow thunk came from the fireplace. I'd never used it. The flue had been closed since I moved in. Now the metal lever clinked once, twice, before the cover inside began to bulge downward. Bits of soot fell into the empty hearth. Something was forcing the flue open from the wrong direction. The cover gave with a sharp metallic ping, swinging down hard enough to rattle the fire tools on their hooks. For a moment, there was only darkness inside. Then a hand slid into view. It was too long, too thin. The skin was that same loose, folded hide I'd seen before, but it shifted unnaturally, like something was swimming just beneath it. The fingers bent in ways they shouldn't as they searched along the brick, tapping and probing. They reached the edge of the hearth and stopped. The tips turned upward toward me, slowly, deliberately. I stepped back. The fingers curled into a beckoning motion. I don't remember deciding to run, but suddenly I was in the bedroom, shoving the dresser harder against the door than before. My breath came in quick bursts, and each one felt stolen from me. For a few minutes I heard nothing. Then, faint, nearly inaudible, came a tapping from the other side of the bedroom wall. It started near the floor, rose higher, then higher still, until it was right over my head. That's when I remembered the attic. The cabin didn't have a proper attic, just a low crawl space above the ceiling, accessible from a panel in the hallway. I could hear the sound moving across it now, the boards flexing with each crawl. The panel creaked. It didn't fall open. Instead, I saw one corner pressed downward slightly, like something was testing it. A single hairline crack appeared in the wood, then another. Dust fell in thin streams. And in the dust were little wet spots, like condensation from breath. I held the knife so tight my hand went numb. I was ready for the panel to drop, ready for it to pour through, but it didn't. Instead, the sound moved back across the ceiling toward the living room, and then came the worst part: silence. I sat there for nearly an hour before I worked up the courage to check. I slid the dresser away in small jerks, every creak loud enough to make my chest ache. When I stepped into the hall, the panel was flush again. No sign it had moved. The living room was empty. The kitchen was empty. Even the hearth looked untouched. I started to think maybe it had given up. Then I saw the front door. The deadbolt was still locked. The chain was still in place, but the entire door frame was subtly warped, bowed inward like it had been under immense pressure from the outside. And in the center of the door, pressed into the wood, was the shape of a handprint. Too large, too thin, with fingers that tapered into points. It hadn't been trying to get in through one way. It had been testing all of them. I'm writing this now as the sun comes up, but I don't know how much longer I can stay here. It's learning the cabin, learning me. Last night it tried the roof, the walls, the fireplace, the attic, and the door. Tonight it might not try at all. Tonight it might succeed. I didn't sleep at all today. Not that it matters anymore. I nailed the windows shut, wedge-locked the doors, stuffed blankets in the fireplace and duct-taped them in place. Even put a chair under the attic panels so I'd hear it fall. The cabin feels like a coffin I've built for myself. The lake is wrong tonight. It's too small, like the water itself is holding its breath. Even the crickets have gone silent. The air feels thicker, almost humid, but cold enough to make my teeth ache. I'm sitting at the kitchen table with the knife and flashlight in front of me. I keep telling myself I'm ready, that if it comes, I'll know where to hit. But there's no plan here, no strategy, just waiting. The first sound isn't dragging, it's knocking. Not at the door, from inside the walls. It's moving fast, circling me in tight loops, the sound bouncing from one corner of the cabin to the next. The boards are trembling, dust falling in little showers. Then the knocks stop. From somewhere above, the roof bows inward, creaking under weight. I glance at the attic panel, still closed, still pinned under the chair. Something drips onto the kitchen table. I look up. The ceiling above me is damp, water stains spreading outward in a slow bloom. But it's not water. It's that same gelatinous, faintly bloody stuff I found on the porch weeks ago. Another drop lands on my hand. It's warm. The attic panel doesn't open. It bursts, knocking the chair aside, wood splintering as something unfolds itself through the gap. I see limbs first, too many to count in the moment, sliding down the wall, folding over the counter, bracing against the floor. And then the head. That slit where its face should be flexes wide, and I hear it. Not a roar, not a hiss, but a deep inhalation that makes the lights flicker. The air feels thinner instantly, my chest tightening as it pulls at something deeper than breath. I run. I don't remember making the choice, but suddenly I'm at the back door, kicking the chair away from the handle, fumbling with the locks. Behind me, the thing's limbs slap against the floor in uneven rhythms, scraping, reaching. I slam the door open and bolt into the night. The cold bites through me immediately, the air wet and sharp. The lake's black surface stares back at me, and for a second, I consider running for the tree line instead. But there's movement between the pines. Too tall, too thin. More than one. The water is my only option. I make it halfway down the slope before something hits the porch behind me. The sound is heavy, final, like it's dropped from the roof to give chase. I don't look back. I can hear it though, that wet spine dragging through the grass as it runs. The shoreline is slick. I nearly fall as I hit the shallows, but I don't stop. I dive into the freezing water, kicking hard until the cabin is a shadow against the hill. I turn then, just to see if it followed. It's standing at the shore, perfectly still, watching. The slit in its head opens wide, teeth flashing in the moonlight, and then it does something I haven't heard before. It laughs. Not a human laugh, not even close. But the rhythm is there, the rise and fall, like it's mocking me for thinking the lake could save me. Then it steps forward into the water. I don't remember swimming to the far side. I don't remember climbing out. I remember waking up at dawn on the gravel road barefoot, shivering so hard I couldn't speak. The sheriff drove me into town. I didn't tell him what happened. I just said someone broke in. He offered to send someone to check the property, but I told him to let it go. Because I know what they'll find. Nothing. I'm writing this from a motel 20 miles away, but I can't stop looking at the bathroom door. It's shut, but every now and then, I hear a faint dripping sound behind it. If you are anywhere near the lake east of Miller's Crossing, if you hear dragging in the night, don't look out the window. It doesn't matter how well you lock the doors. It's already inside. We moved into the old house after the miscarriage. My husband said a change would be good for me. Fresh air, quiet, place to heal. We didn't plan to find a baby. It was our second night there. We heard crying, soft, high-pitched, coming from the attic. My husband thought it was a cat, but when he pulled the cord to the attic door, the crying got louder. He found her swaddled in moldy blankets. No note, no explanation. Just her, nestled in the dust, barely alive. We called the police. They took her to the hospital. No missing child reports. No birth certificate. No DNA match. She's a ghost child, the nurse joked. The state was going to put her in the system. My husband wouldn't allow it. We were meant to find her. He said, maybe she's the reason we came here. We named her Lily, brought her home. The first night, the baby monitor whispered, not crying, whispers. She's back. We brought one. My husband thought it was a glitch. I knew better. Every night, Lily stared into the dark corners of the room and laughed at things I couldn't see. The monitor whispered in different voices. all of them dry and eager. "Don't take her. She's ours." I wanted to leave. He wouldn't. He was obsessed with her. Wouldn't let me hold her anymore. Wouldn't let me in the nursery. "She cries when you touch her," he said. "She only wants me." One night I woke up alone, his side of the bed cold. I found the nursery door locked from the inside. Then the crying stopped. When I broke down the door, the crib was empty. He was gone. No sign of a struggle, no footprints. Just an old baby blanket soaked with something black and thick. It smelled like soil and rot. The monitor lay in the crib, still on. "She's not yours," it whispered. "She never was. But he is now." The police asked questions. Searched, found nothing. No signs he'd ever been there. No fingerprints, not even his clothes. They showed me the hospital records. There was never a baby registered under the name Lily. There was never a baby at all. I still hear her at night, not crying, laughing, from the attic. I found a listing online. Furnished basement room for rent. Private entrance. $400 a month. No pets, no questions. It was sketchy, but I was desperate. I'd just lost my job and my savings were circling the drain. The landlord was a tall, thin man who didn't smile. He handed me a key, told me the rules. Stay in my room after 9 p.m. Don't go upstairs. Never look through the keyhole. I laughed. He didn't. People think they want to know. They don't. I should have walked away. Instead, I moved in. The first night was uneventful, except for the sound of footsteps above me. Constant pacing, all night. Fast, then slow, then faster again, like someone running in circles. On the third night, I woke up to scraping, not footsteps, nails dragging across the ceiling. I went upstairs despite the rules. The hallway was pitch black, every door shut except one at the far end. Open a crack, soft, wet breathing echoed from it. I turned back. The next morning the landlord stood at my door. "You went up," he said, not angry, sad. "I didn't go in," I told him. "Doesn't matter. It saw you." That night, the pacing turned into thumping, something slamming against the floor above. I stuffed towels under my door, turned the TV up, and prayed for daylight. At 3:12 a.m. the power died. Silence. Then knocking. Not on the front door, on my bedroom door. 3 slow knocks. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Then a voice, soft and gurgling. "Let me in. I want to see who you are." I stayed frozen until morning. When the sun rose, the door was wide open. The landlord was gone. His car, his things, all of it. I called the police. They searched the house. Only one thing was strange, they said. There's no upstairs. The blueprints showed a one-story home. No second floor, no staircase. They thought I was crazy. But last night, I found the keyhole he warned me about. In the hallway, hidden behind a false panel. My hands were shaking. I looked. All I saw was an eye, looking back. Not human, too wide, all pupil. Then it whispered, "Found you." Now I hear footsteps again, only this time, they're below me. This happened when I was about 14 years old. It still sits ingrained in my memory. We moved a few times in my life. My parents taught school, but eventually my father took a role in a country church in the rural U.S. A good, quiet community. Folks were nice enough and we settled in just fine. Our home was not far from the church facility itself, out in rural farmland. Our home was one of those typical country houses with a long driveway, at least 300 feet from the house to the road. My main chore/job was to take out all the trash and take out the trash bin to the roadside for the garbage pickup the next morning. I collect all the interior trash, get it into the bin, and get my shoes on to roll it up the driveway and up to the road. It was a clear night. The stars were out, and though there was some dim glow from the town we lived in, we could see them clearly enough. We had a nearby neighbor in the next land plot over, whose property was mostly cornfields and some woods lining the property up next to ours. This becomes relevant in a bit. I'm walking down the driveway, whistling a favorite tune, looking up at the stars, dragging the heavy trash bin full of garbage out towards the road. Things get darker as I head down the driveway, but I knew my way pretty well by then, the distant glow of the front porch light giving me a slight guide. Halfway up the driveway or so, I froze when I looked to the left. The silhouette of a white canine stood there, staring at me. At first I started to panic, thinking it was a wolf, but then I realized that didn't make sense, as there are no wolves where we live. I slowly started moving forward again, thinking it was no big deal. Then the thought dawned on me. There are coyotes out here, but white coyotes shouldn't exist around here. That seems odd. I decided to move at a faster pace. At that moment, the canine comes out of the woods and starts moving towards me, slowly at first. My heart leapt into my throat. It then speeds up into a trot beelining towards me. I'm really beginning to sweat as, though I've made it to the road, there's barely any light out there, and I don't have anything blunt I can use to defend myself if this thing is hostile. The animal gets close enough that I can see it's obviously just a dog, not a wolf or a coyote or anything scary. It comes up and just stops. No sniffing, no friendly actions towards me, but no hostility either. It just stands and stares at me. In the dim glow of the porch light, I see it has a black collar on, with a little tag shining on it. The tag is square in shape and has a name on it. Buck. The dog, I presume, is named Buck, eventually stops staring at me and slowly moves on beyond our driveway. It stops abruptly, takes a defensive stance, and starts growling in a low rumble. This is where I become unsettled. I looked at where the dog was staring and growling. Just across the road in the cornfield, I see a pair of glowing something. 2 dots. I can't tell if they're just eyes shining from maybe a bobcat or a deer or something else. The issue is, they were too high up off the ground to be a small animal, almost like something taller, standing there. Something felt very off about that moment, and just as I began to consider what those dots were, the dog lurched forward, barking and sprinting towards them. They disappeared into the cornfield, the tall corn plants rustling, with the dog darting in after. I'm slowly backing away, the crickets chirping like a harmony to this entire situation, when all of a sudden, the scariest howl I'd ever heard rang out. My fight-or-flight instinct kicked in, and I went into a all-out sprint for the house. Got inside and locked the storm door and front door immediately. I'm in a cold sweat and my dad asks what happened. I tell him what occurred outside and where the dog had come from, and he decides we'd go over and ask our neighbor if maybe it was their dog and I'd just witnessed it catching a deer or coyote or something it wanted. The next morning, we got up, had breakfast, then walked over to our neighbor's house to describe to him the events of last night. I tell him the description of the dog and say I saw a tag named Buck on it. He stands there, bites his lower lip, then asks if we're sure that's what we saw. I tell him I was certain. Black collar, square tag with the word Buck on it. He takes us to his backyard near his metal barn to a small wooden cross with a black dog collar hanging on it, a square tag with the word Buck on it. Buck was my farm dog and best friend for 12 years. He died last year. My wife and I will never forget him. Son, I'm not sure that's what you saw, but that can't have been my dog. My heart both sank and started beating rapidly at the same time. What did I see last night? We lived at that home for another 2 years, without any further incidents before eventually moving away to another place in southwest Missouri, where I lived until I moved out for college. I will never forget that night, and everywhere I've lived since has been well lit with short driveways, and no cornfields nearby. Good dog. Derek first got the skeleton a couple of years ago. One night while I was brushing my teeth, I gazed out the window. In the light of my motion sensor light, I saw Derek reaching into the trunk of his car. Out he pulled a large cardboard box with the Spirit Halloween logo on it. I had never seen a bigger smile, even bigger than the one at his wedding. The next morning, while also brushing my teeth, I saw a 12-foot skeleton sitting in Derek's front lawn. It stood across the street, with its hand in a waving position. Over the next few years, I saw that skeleton in his yard for a majority of the time. Every time a new holiday would come around on the calendar, the skeleton would be put into a new outfit. Uncle Sam hat for 4th of July, Santa hat for Christmas, and just plain old skeleton for Halloween. Derek really loved the skeleton. I would see him quickly rush it inside any time it was slightly too windy or rainy. Even during the town's tornado warning scare last year, before retreating to his basement, he collected the skeleton outside. But in October of last year, we got an HOA. I don't even know who wanted it, to be honest. They just showed up one day and made me cut my azaleas because they did not fit my house's color scheme. From the start, nobody really liked them, like all HOAs. One of those people was obviously Derek. One day, while walking past his house, I saw Derek cleaning up the skeleton a bit, so I threw him a wave. Instead of waving back, he came up to me on the sidewalk to talk to me. Hey man, I was just wondering if you had my back if I decided to stand up to the HOA. I just read through the rules and they said that I would not be allowed to display Jerry outside of October. I'm planning on keeping him up as a protest. Jerry? Are you talking about the skeleton? Oh, yeah, sorry. Forgot that's an inside joke between me and me. So if the HOA shows up and tells me to take it down, could you speak on my behalf in the HOA meeting? I felt a little bit pressured. Saying no felt a little bit rude with how much Derek loved Jerry and all. But since the skeleton has always been a joy to see, and since I also hated the HOA, I told him yes. He repeatedly thanked me with his hands together, so when November 1st rolled around, I was prepared to see Jerry disappear, but I wasn't prepared for it to happen on November 1st. I was on my porch, sipping warm black coffee from my Jack Skellington mug. Jerry stood with his fist up, ready to fight any HOA members. Across the street, Justin was stapling Christmas lights to his roof while standing on a ladder. He had headphones in, bobbing his head to what was probably Mariah Carey. In Justin's yard was an army of Christmas inflatables. Santas, reindeer, Grinches, and many others flooded his yard. This made me mildly annoyed. As I was shaking my head behind Justin's back, a white SUV pulled in front of Derek's house. The door opened and out popped a middle-aged woman wearing a sweater vest. It was the HOA president. Pretty sure her name was Jasmine or something like that. So Jasmine marched up Derek's path and knocked on his glass screen door. While waiting for an answer, she checked her Apple Watch for the time. She probably read a time around 8 a.m. After a short wait, Derek opened the door wearing a robe. Derek opened his mouth to speak, but before he could, Jasmine spoke up. Yeah, hello, Derek. I was just wondering if you were aware of what day it was, she said demeaningly, like she was speaking to a child who had to be taught a lesson. Oh, yeah. Pretty sure it's Saturday. Not that kind of day. The other kind, she said as she grabbed her nose and shook her head side to side. Oh, sorry. It would be November 1st. Have a good Halloween last night? No, my kids got all hyper and wouldn't sleep. But to why I'm here. What is that? She said as she pointed at the 12-foot skeleton behind her. That's Jerry, he said while chuckling. No, it's not. It is a violation of the HOA guidelines. No Halloween decorations up outside of October. Take it down immediately, please. No, I'm not going to do that. Derek's cheerful, goofy tone ended. He spoke with a sternness I had not heard from him before. Okay, well, if you are not, then I will. And I will be forced to put it in the dumpster and fine you. She crossed her arms. If you do that, I will literally call the cops on you. That is theft. Well, let's just see whose side they are on. Once Jasmine finished saying that, she turned around and walked for the skeleton. As she did, Derek pulled out his iPhone and dialed a number and held it to his ear. He then went inside with the phone. Jasmine got up behind Jerry and put her hands on the pelvis and pushed. Jerry came tumbling over on the grass. When he hit the ground, his skull popped off and rolled to the sidewalk. Jasmine walked to it and picked it up. As her back was turned, Jerry stood himself up. Jasmine walked over to her SUV and opened the trunk. As Jasmine was waiting for the trunk to open, Jerry, still headless, walked to her and lightly tapped her on the shoulder. What do you want? She couldn't finish her sentence. She stood looking directly up at Jerry. Jerry gently pulled his skull out of her hands. Jasmine stood, mouth agape, stunned, unable to move. I have to say, when I saw this, I too was rather frightened, but I stayed sitting on my porch to watch what would happen next. Jerry would then grab Jasmine by the neck and lift her off the ground. Jasmine reached for Jerry's bony hands to free herself. She kicked her legs to assist the escape, but Jerry must have had a lot of invisible muscle, for she did not come close to escaping. Jerry then changed his grip on her from her neck to her ankle. She swayed back and forth upside down. Have you guys ever watched The Avengers? If you have, then you are familiar with the scene where the Hulk grabs Loki and repeatedly slams Loki on the ground. That is what Jerry would do to Jasmine, over and over on the pavement of the road. Jerry would slam Jasmine with all of his force. Jasmine didn't make a single sound after the first swing. After a dozen or so swings, Jasmine was dead. Most of her upper body was deformed, and her sweater vest was now soaked in blood. I sat in silence, in disbelief of what just happened. I always wonder what Derek's reaction to that was. Was it like when a parent finds out their kid is a bully in school? Was it like when a parent's child goes to prison? Or was he proud of what he saw? I really have no clue. Jerry looked up from Jasmine's body and changed his focus across the street. He breathed heavily, then started to walk towards Justin. I could hear Justin faintly singing some Christmas song. I thought of how good those headphones were, to where he couldn't hear a 12-foot skeleton approach him from behind. I thought about asking him what brand they were. Too bad I wouldn't get the chance. Once Jerry made it to the ladder, he grabbed the top of it and threw it over. I heard Justin let out a yell before I heard him and the ladder make a thump sound. I wasn't actually able to see what happened next. Most of it was blocked by Justin's minivan, but based on the movement of Jerry, Justin was being stomped to death. Justin called out for help, but it was difficult to hear over the roar of inflatables. I saw Justin's wife quickly glance out of the curtains, but after seeing what was out there, she promptly shut them. Jerry gave a few more good stomps before stopping. He then turned his attention to the inflatables in the front yard. He tore through all of them, popping Santa and killing Rudolph, tearing through the Grinch and unplugging Frosty. Standing in a pile of now dead Christmas cheer, he changed his attention to me. I could tell he was looking at my Jack Skellington mug, so I said aloud in a shaky voice, "Sorry, it's actually a Halloween movie. If you have some problem with Christmas, this is not the place." He marched towards me anyway, across the street, through my yard and up to my porch. I tried to quickly stand up and run, but before I could do the running part, Jerry grabbed me by the neck and pulled me out from the porch. He started to punch me in the stomach a few times, knocking the air out of me. As he did, I saw a police cruiser down the road, probably the one called by Derek. I hoped that Jerry didn't kill me before the cruiser got there. The time it took for the cruiser to drive those few blocks felt like forever. When it finally did get to my block, I saw them nod their heads and drive away, while saying to themselves, "Nope, not today." I was on my own, repeatedly getting punched by a 12-foot skeleton. I remember this was how Houdini died. If Houdini couldn't survive this, how could I? Then for a second, Jerry stopped punching me. For a second, I thought he was letting me go, but then I was lifted over his head and flung across the street. I flew over Justin's car and landed on the fallen ladder. After hitting the ground, it took me a second to understand what was around me, but after a few deep breaths that went away, the first thing I saw was Justin's body. Oh yeah, he was stomped to death. The first thing I heard was music coming from two places. The first was from Justin's headphones in the grass. They were playing Jingle Bell Rock. The second was from a caroling minivan coming down the road towards me. I saw Jerry walking towards me before he could pick me up again. I snatched Justin's headphones. Oh, they're Beats brand. Jerry then picked me up by the skull. He placed my head in between his two massive hands. He started to squeeze. I could feel the pressure in my head building up, my eyes starting to pop out of socket. But before my head could be crushed like a jack-o'-lantern on November 1st, I slid the headphones over Jerry's ears. He immediately dropped me. Jerry fell backwards on top of a popped Santa. He started to shake, his bones clacking together like a xylophone. The minivan was 1 block away. I quickly think of something cool to say while I would end Jerry's life. It had to be something sort of relevant to Christmas or Halloween. Then I thought of something. "This is what you have to understand, Jerry. Christmas, that's in 54 days. But Halloween, that's in 364. So whether you like it or not, it's Merry Frickin' Christmas." As I finished the coolest thing I ever said, I pulled my foot back and launched it forward and planted it in Jerry's chin. His head launched off like a firework, flying off into the street and perfectly underneath the front wheel of the caroling minivan. Without any difficulties, Jerry's skull was crushed. The family stopped singing Jingle Bells to ask what they had just hit. I looked down. The skeleton had stopped shaking and laid still and on the ground. I kicked at his ribs. He didn't move. I walked across the street and knocked on Derek's door to tell him what happened. When he opened, he already had tears in his eyes. He didn't even cry at his wedding, I thought. Before I could say anything, Derek ran across the street and held Jerry in his arms. I went inside my own house and called the police. Not sure who will go to prison for this one. Case still hasn't happened yet. Probably a bit hard to make sense of it all. Me and Derek have talked and we have no clue what caused Jerry to all of a sudden come alive like that. But now, if you were to drive around your neighborhood, you will not see any 12-foot skeletons named Jerry. Instead, you will see a flagpole in Derek's front yard, forever flying a skull and crossbones, with a small plaque at the bottom that reads, "In memory of the one and only Jerry." Hey everyone. I know this is going to sound crazy, but I need to know if anyone has ever experienced anything like this. I live in a small farmhouse that I inherited from my grandmother 6 weeks ago when she passed away. It sits on a lot of a couple acres of land. When she passed away, I had just graduated from college. So instead of selling it, I decided I'd live in it and maintain it while I looked for a job in the area. The nearest town is around 30 minutes away from me, but I usually don't mind the seclusion. In fact, my closest neighbor is around 10 minutes away as the crow flies. The first day that I got here, I was over the moon about being the sole owner of my childhood home. The long dirt road to get you to the house was lined with dense forest, and once I finally reached the house, I realized that my grandmother had really let this place go. There were vines practically holding the shutters closed like the house was holding in a secret. I knew I was going to have a lot of work to do, but since I had a bit of savings, I could focus on getting the house back in order. When I unlocked the front door and went inside, I was met with an overpowering smell of lavender. It seemed that even though my grandmother let the outside of the house go, the inside was pristine. I set my luggage down and went into her bedroom. I spent the next week cleaning up the outside of the house. I found all kinds of things in the overgrown grass, like an old farmer's hat, gardening scissors, and coloring books that had been scribbled in. I hadn't ever seen any of these items before, but chalked it up to belonging to my cousins when they were kids. The first week of living there, nothing else really went on. It's this week, the second week, that strange things started happening. After a long day of finishing the yard work, I came inside and kicked my boots off. I made sure to lock the front door and deadbolt it, since living alone in the middle of the woods as a woman can get kind of scary. I made my way to the bathroom when I heard footsteps behind me. I whipped my head around, but I didn't see anything. I thought it was just the old house settling, so I continued to the bathroom and got into the shower. Now, I don't know if it's my mind playing tricks on me, but every time I dunked my head under the shower head, I thought I heard giggling right behind me. Once again, nothing there. I got out of the shower, dried myself off, and slipped into my pajamas. That's when I noticed something written in the steam on the mirror. Hello, smiley face. I was genuinely freaked out at this point, but knew that my younger family members had been here right after grandmother died, so I wrote it off that the writing was maybe lingering. That night, as I was drifting off to sleep, I heard a loud knock at my door. I checked the time on my phone. 11:43 p.m. Like I said, my nearest neighbor is 10 minutes away, so I had no clue what someone was doing here late at night. Before my dad passed away, he instilled in me that the world is very dangerous. So the minute I turned 21, he paid for me to get a concealed carry license. I grabbed my pistol and tucked it into my waistband as I walked toward the front door. I could have just ignored it, but I didn't know if maybe it was the police or someone in trouble. I opened the door a bit and saw a rather small man. I'm 5'2", and he couldn't have been much taller than me, in a button-up polo with black slacks, and those shiny shoes that the pastor always wore. "Hello," he spoke up. "I'm Mr. Vister. I work for the night census." He had the biggest smile on his face, almost like he had won the lottery. "The night census?" I said suspiciously. "I've never heard of that." "Well, yes. We only knock on select doors. Think of it as a sort of government initiative for after dark population tracking." He ran his fingers through his gelled back, almost slimy black hair. "Who's all here? Has anyone been here since the last count?" Mr. Vister tried peeking around my shoulder, but I quickly shut him down. "I'm sorry, sir. What do you mean since the last count?" "We come by a couple times a night to get the exact number of people living in the household. When I came by earlier, I spoke to your gardener, and he let me know that he lived here as well as his son." He pulled up a clipboard out from behind his back. "But he didn't inform me that anyone else lived here. I'll just write it down real quick." I watched as he wrote, "Young female in her late 20s, presumably alone." Under where he had already written, "Gardener and his young son." There was obviously no one else here, so I was extremely startled. "I don't have a gardener. I think you must have the wrong house. It's just me here." I didn't notice my slip-up until I said it. "I mean, my husband should be back any minute now. He had to run into town to get something." I tried to cover it up by lying, but he saw right through it. His smile grew wider, and he turned his head to the ground, still staring at me through his eyebrows. "We know you're here alone, Natalie." He chuckled, but not in a friendly way. It sounded like a dry rattling coming from his throat. I slammed the door shut and locked it. I could still hear his laughter outside, which turned into a sea of screaming. I ran to the bedroom to call someone, and, of course, no signal. I couldn't get to my car without him seeing me, so I had no idea what to do. I barricaded myself in my room, but I accidentally drifted off to sleep. I woke up again to a knock at the door. I looked at my phone, 3:36 a.m. I don't know if this Mr. Vister guy is some kind of prankster or lunatic. I wasn't going to let him scare me. I opened up the door and didn't let him get a word in. "Stop harassing me," I spat. "I have a gun. I don't know what you're trying to do, but you're trespassing. Go away." His smile softened into a look of confusion. "I'm sorry for disturbing you, ma'am, but I don't believe we've met." His lips curled into a smile again, and he held out his hand for me to shake. "I'm Mr. Vister, from the night Census. We are—" I cut him off. "Yeah, I know who you are. You were just here." "Oh no, you must be mistaken. Me and my twin brother take turns checking houses." I was obviously confused at this point, so he pulled out his clipboard. "So you must be Natalie. I've got that you live in the bedroom towards the back of the house. Then the other occupants are the gardener, Silas, and his son, Thomas. I have here that they live in the bedroom that branches off of the family room." "No, I don't know who Silas or Thomas are, but they definitely don't live here." "What? No. I see them right back there on the couch." He stood on his tiptoes and waved to something behind me. As I turned around to see what he was waving at, Mr. Vister ran past me while giggling. I had no clue who this guy was, or why he wanted to be in my home, but I saw this as an opportunity to get out of there. I grabbed my keys from the bowl next to the door and ran to my car, leaving the front door wide open. I peeled out of there as quickly as possible to a small motel in town. That's where I am now. Do any of you know what's going on? Has anyone experienced anything like this? Any help would be appreciated. Please, help me. Dried sweat, rotten food, fermented trash, cigarette smoke, dust. The mixture of odors overwhelmed my nose. I had to take a step back, gagging. Once I filled my lungs with fresh air from the outside, I took a step in. "I'm home," I called. I left my sneakers by the foyer. Mom's boots were there, gathered among the shoes of siblings long gone. I peeked through the hall and into the living room. It was a mess. Not even the dark could hide the collage of trash, clothes, and empty meal boxes. There was a tricycle next to the couch, tiny and colorful, though children hadn't inhabited this place in almost a decade. Mom had covered the windows with aluminum foil and newspaper. No light bulbs, no lamps. She said light gave her headaches. A lantern was needed to navigate the apartment, or a smartphone. I found Mom sulking in her bedroom, curled into a ball and covered by duvets. "What took you so long?" Mom's voice was high-pitched and with a well-developed vocal fry. It resembled the creakiness of a rusty door hinge. I lowered my phone light. "I told you I went to Emma's bachelorette." "You didn't tell me a thing. I stayed here to starve." A sigh got stuck in my throat. God forbid I let it out in front of Mom. Or worse, what if I sighed and then explained to her I brought her a weekend worth of pizza and ready meals? With my money at that. Would I survive that? "Are you hungry?" I asked. "Of course I am." It gave me an excuse to leave for another room and encounter yet another frustration. All over the kitchen laid the aftermath of my weekend off. Pizza boxes and plastic containers were scattered across the counter. One of them remained inside the microwave half-eaten. There were no offerings left for Mom, as she'd eaten them all. "I'll go to the store to buy you something," I called. "Will you abandon me again?" She accented every syllable with spite. "I'll be back in an hour." If I had used a bike, the trip to the convenience store would have been 20 minutes. That also meant less time filling my lungs with clean summer air. As I walked, I ruminated on how wonderful and how terrible the sense of smell was. We cannot close our noses like we close our eyes. How inconvenient is that? If I wanted to stop smelling, I also had to stop breathing. There's another way, though. If we smell something for long enough, no matter how pleasant or disgusting, the brain mutes the scent. It took me a lifetime to grow accustomed to the smell of Mom's apartment, and only a weekend off to find it unbearable again. As I entered the supermarket, I quickly glanced at the yard section. They sold garden furniture and flowers and grilling equipment. I grew up thinking no one ever bought those. The gas tanks reminded me of a fun fact. Methane does not have a smell naturally. The characteristic rotten eggs odor gets added to it for safety reasons. That way, an individual can detect a gas leak before the whole building goes kaboom. My phone vibrated in my pocket. It was Emma. "Hey," I answered, searching through the ready meals. "Ready to go?" Kalavi answered on the other side. I moved the phone from one ear to the other. Although it was impossible for Mom to be around, I looked over my shoulder. "I can't do it," I said. Kalavi took a deep breath. "Terya, listen. You need to get out of there. Now." I grabbed some meatballs and potatoes. That would do. "I can't. Mom needs someone to take care of her." "What are you even saying?" When upset, Kalavi spoke slowly and accented every word just like Mom. "I'll be fine. It's Mom. She's an odd person, but she's not evil." "Are you listening to yourself?" He screeched on the other side of the line. It peaked the microphone. "I don't appreciate you yelling at me." I was on the shopping line. Only 2 people stood in front of me, but this was a minuscule town. Everyone knew everyone's faces. What if they heard Kalavi losing it over the phone? "And what do you want me to do?" At least Kalavi lowered his voice a little. "You're speaking nonsense. She ate Nina." "She didn't," I scoffed, then lowered my voice to a whisper. "Nina ran away with her boyfriend." "You saw it. You saw it happen. What are you talking about?" I envisioned Kalavi pulling his hairs out. "It was a nightmare. Seek help, I mean it." I placed the ready meal and an energy drink on the treadmill. "And Mom needs help and compassion. That's the only way she can get better." "You're not helping her. You're feeding her." The products reached the hands of the cashier, assigned to end this senseless call. "I need to go back home. Talk to you later." I hung up with Kalavi mid-sentence. I packed my purchases and walked back home. Him screaming caught me off guard. It hurt a little. We had a great bachelorette together. Unlike Mom's house, Kalavi's was clean and sleek, with plenty of sunlight and even one of those little robot vacuums rolling around. I was happy to see him doing good despite everything. I was happy to see him, period. None of the other siblings gave us that grace. They left home to disappear. Kalavi said. They didn't leave. She ate them all. But he didn't feel like talking about Mom, much less in front of his wife. She believed he was an orphan. I shook off the memories of our weekend together. I left them at the door along with the prospect of fresh air. One deep breath and I was ready to go back home. As I microwaved the meal, I realized I'd forgotten to buy something for myself. Too late to go back to the store, however. I went to sleep hungry. A bad idea. Hunger always brought nightmares. Hungry Mom always brought nightmares. In darkness I awoke. my body unresponsive and my mind hazy. It happened so often, and yet I never got used to it. Panic kicked in as usual. No matter how much I begged in my head, not even a finger would move. Even my eyes stayed glued on the same spot. I was trapped in my own body. Some light from the midnight sun bled through the window, usually a blessing. The light now delineated Mom's terrible form. She watched from the ceiling, her eyes glistening in the darkness, her floppy belly, product of almost a dozen childbirths, drooped over my immobile body. Her saggy tits dangled atop my head. Both elbows pointed towards the floor unnaturally. They were backwards. She resembled a spider. Slowly, Mom crawled down the wall, closer to the headboard. The drywall cracked as she buried her nails and toes onto it. Soon I felt her sparse hair tickling my forehead. I tried to scream, but my mouth remained shut. My lungs wouldn't breathe faster. My eyes refused to shed tears. My whole body remained still, like the corpse I'd soon become. Nina never had a boyfriend. I once saw her kissing another girl at the lake, and I saw how Mom crawled to her bed that night. Mom looked like a crocodile wearing a human suit, her arms and legs bent uncomfortably, at impossible angles. She opened her mouth wide, impossibly so. I heard the crack as her jawline popped out of its sockets. I saw how she sucked onto Nina's scalp like ice cream, then nibbled it. She crawled further into Nina's bed as she swallowed her head, then her neck, then her shoulders. She pushed forward, her breasts, her hips, her thighs. Only Nina's ankles and feet dangled out of her mouth. Mom gargled, struggling to consume the last bits of Nina. Her whole body contracted as she swallowed what was left of my older sister. I was next. I felt Mom's breath next to my ear, warm and humid. It stank of cigarettes and acid. She gently pushed my face to the side. "You let me starve." She punctured a hole in my neck, the one that never healed. I always said it was a birthmark. Immobile, helpless, stupid, with no other option, I waited until she fed herself. In my head I promised, never again. Never again I'll let this happen. Never again I'll leave Mom to starve. She needs me.